Hi everyone. My name is Maya Khan and I'm 22 years old. What you are about to hear is not just a story. It's my truth. A painful journey of betrayal, loss, and revenge that changed my life forever. Disclaimer. This story is a work of fiction, created for entertainment and storytelling purposes only. Any resemblance to real persons, events, or situations is purely coincidental. I always believed my brother, Arman, was the strongest person in my life. After our parents passed away, the world suddenly became silent and heavy for both of us. I was only a teenager back then, still trying to understand how life works, while Arman had already stepped into adulthood. From that moment, he took responsibility for everything. He said he would handle the house, the money, and my future. At that time I felt safe because I thought having an elder brother meant I would never fall. Arman was not just responsible, he was also confident and smart in dealing with people. Everyone in our neighborhood respected him. They used to say he was mature beyond his age, and that I was lucky to have someone like him. Whenever I heard those words, I felt proud. I would look at him and think that no matter how difficult life becomes, he will always protect me from every danger. He never showed weakness in front of me. Even when I was scared or confused, he would stay calm and tell me everything would be fine. That calmness made me trust him completely. After our parents' death, he became the decision-maker of the house. He took control of the bank accounts, property papers, and all financial matters. At first, I didn't question anything because I was too young and emotionally dependent on him. I was still in school and later college, so I focused on my studies while he focused on everything else. Whenever I asked small questions about money or bills, he would smile and say I should concentrate on my education and leave the rest to him. His voice always sounded caring, so I never thought there could be anything wrong behind it. Slowly, life became routine. He would leave early in the morning and come back late at night. Sometimes he would be on phone calls for hours, speaking in a serious tone that I didn't understand. I noticed that he never discussed his work in detail with me. Whenever I asked where he had been or what he was doing, he would either change the topic or give short answers. Still, I ignored these signs because I trusted him more than anyone in the world. There were moments when I felt a small discomfort inside me, like something was missing in his explanations. For example, I once asked him to show me our financial records because I wanted to understand how much we were spending and saving. He gently refused and said I would get confused with numbers and documents. He even told me that he didn't want me to stress about adult problems. At that time, I thought he was just being protective, but now I realize he was controlling what I was allowed to know. Even though I lived in the same house with him, there was a growing distance between us. It wasn't physical distance, but emotional silence. He stopped sharing small details about his day, and I stopped asking too many questions because I didn't want to annoy him. Our conversations became shorter over time. Still, I never doubted his intentions. I believed that his silence was part of his responsibility, not a sign of hidden truth. I remember people used to admire our bond. They would say we were a perfect example of sibling trust. But what they saw was only the surface. Inside the house, things were different. Our man was always serious, always calculating something, while I was living in a world where I thought everything was stable. I never imagined that trust could be used as a shield to hide something darker. Looking back now, I realize how blind I was. I never checked documents, never questioned decisions, and never thought that someone so close could hide things from me. I thought family meant honesty by default, and that belief became my biggest weakness. I gave him full control of everything without realizing that control can sometimes turn into silence that hides truth. One evening, my life changed in a way I could never have imagined. It started like any normal day. I had gone to college in the morning, attended my classes, and returned home earlier than usual because one of my lectures was canceled. I remember feeling slightly happy that day because I thought I would get some extra time to rest at home. I had no idea that I was walking into a moment that would destroy everything I believed about my life and my brother. When I reached home, something immediately felt wrong. The gate was slightly open, which was unusual because our man always made sure everything was locked properly. I called out his name, but there was no answer. The house was unusually quiet, almost as if it had been emptied of life. I walked inside slowly, expecting to find him or at least hear some sound from another room, but instead I found silence and emptiness spreading through every corner. As I stepped further inside, I noticed something even more disturbing. The furniture in the living room was not in its place. Some chairs were missing, the small table we used for meals was gone, and even the decorative items that my mother once loved were no longer there. At first, I thought maybe Arman had moved things for cleaning or renovation, but the deeper I went into the house, the more I realized this was not normal. The house was being emptied, not cleaned. My heart started beating faster. I ran into my room, and that is when I felt my breath stop completely. My clothes were scattered, my belongings were disturbed, and many things were missing. The wardrobe was half empty. I opened the drawers quickly, searching for something that could explain what was happening, but instead I found more confusion. My important documents were gone, including personal papers and some items I had kept carefully for years. I rushed to Arman's room next. It was worse there. His cupboard was completely empty. The study table had been cleared. Even the important files that he used to keep were missing. It felt like someone had carefully planned to remove every trace of belongings from the house. My hands started shaking as I tried to understand what was happening. I kept calling Arman's phone, but it was switched off. In the middle of this confusion, I noticed an envelope placed neatly on the dining table. It was the only thing left untouched in the entire house. My hands trembled as I picked it up. I had a strange feeling that whatever was inside would change everything, but I still opened it. Inside, there was a single document. I unfolded it slowly, and my eyes froze at the words written on it. It was a legal paper stating that our house had been transferred to another name. Below it was a line that felt like a knife to my heart. It said I should not contact the sender again. For a moment, I couldn't understand what I was reading. My mind refused to accept it. This house was ours, the only place left after our parents died. How could it be transferred? And more importantly, how could I not know anything about it? I kept reading the paper again and again, hoping I had misunderstood, but the words remained the same. My legs weakened and I sat down on the floor, unable to process what I had just discovered. I tried calling Arman again and again, but his phone remained off. I went outside the house, hoping maybe he was nearby or had gone somewhere urgently, but there was no sign of him anywhere. I asked neighbors if they had seen him or anyone moving things from the house, but no one gave me a clear answer. Some said they had seen a truck earlier, but they didn't know what was inside it. Slowly, a painful realization started forming in my mind. This was not a misunderstanding. This was not an accident. Everything had been planned. The empty house, the missing belongings, the legal paper, and Arman's disappearance were all connected. My trust in him began to break piece by piece as I understood that the person I believed would protect me might have been the one who destroyed everything around me. After that day, my life collapsed into a silence I had never experienced before. The house was gone, my belongings were gone, and the only person I thought I could depend on had disappeared without leaving any explanation. For the first time, I realized what it truly means to have nothing. I had no home, no money, and no clear direction about what would happen next. Everything I once considered stable was suddenly erased, and I was left standing in a world that felt completely unfamiliar. I tried to reach Arman again and again, but his phone remained switched off. I contacted some distant relatives, but most of them were confused and unwilling to get involved in what had happened. Some even avoided giving me a place to stay, probably because they didn't want to take responsibility for someone in my situation. I felt like I was being pushed away from every direction, as if I had become invisible in the world I once belonged to. Every night I kept asking myself how everything changed so quickly, but I had no answers. With no other option, I started staying at a small bus station near the highway. It was not a place anyone would choose to live, but I had no choice left. The floor was cold, and the noise of passing buses made it impossible to sleep peacefully. I would sit in a corner, holding my bag close to me, afraid that even that small possession might be taken away. At night, I would watch people come and go, each of them having somewhere to return to, while I had nowhere at all. Sometimes I would go to nearby shops and ask if I could do small work in exchange for food. A few people were kind enough to help me, giving me leftover food or allowing me to clean small areas in their shops. But most of the time, I survived on very little. Hunger became a constant part of my life, and I slowly began to understand how quickly dignity can disappear when survival becomes the only goal. I stopped thinking about comfort or future plans. My only focus became making it through each day. In those painful days, my mind kept returning to Arman. I remembered his face, his voice, and every moment when I trusted him blindly. At first, I kept thinking maybe something forced him to leave. Maybe there was a misunderstanding, or maybe I would eventually find a logical explanation. But as days passed, those thoughts started to fade. Instead, something else began to grow inside me. Something heavier and darker. It was the feeling that I had been deliberately removed from his life, not accidentally left behind. One evening, while sitting at the bus station, I started thinking about everything carefully. I began recalling small details that I had ignored before. The way Arman used to avoid discussing financial matters, the way he never showed me important documents, and the way he always controlled decisions without letting me understand the process. At that time, I thought it was protection, but now I started seeing it differently. It was control. Slowly, I began to realize that my trust had been used against me. The more I thought about it, the more I understood that his disappearance was not random. The legal paper, the missing house, and his sudden exit all seemed connected in a way that I had not noticed before. It felt like a carefully arranged plan, not an emotional decision. This realization hurt more than anything else I had experienced so far. It was one thing to lose everything, but it was something else entirely to understand that it might have been taken from me intentionally by someone I considered family. Even though I was broken, something inside me started changing during those nights at the bus station. The sadness did not disappear, but it slowly transformed into something else. I started observing people more closely, thinking more deeply, and remembering every detail from my past life. I stopped crying as much because I realized crying would not change anything. Instead, I began focusing on understanding what had actually happened. At times, I would look at the busy road and think about how life had once been normal for me. I had a home, a brother, and a future that seemed simple. Now I had nothing except questions. But those questions slowly became my only strength. I no longer wanted just comfort or sympathy. I wanted clarity. I wanted to know the truth behind everything that led to this point, even if the truth was painful. After spending weeks in uncertainty and struggle, something inside me refused to stay broken forever. Living at the bus station had changed me in ways I never imagined. I had learned to survive without comfort, to stay alert in unfamiliar surroundings, and to observe people more carefully than ever before. Hunger and loneliness were still part of my daily life. But now my mind had become sharper, more focused. I no longer saw myself as just a victim of circumstances. I started thinking like someone who needed answers, no matter how long it took to find them. One night, while sitting quietly near a small tea stall, I overheard two men talking about real estate investments and a growing company in another city. At first, it seemed like ordinary business talk, but something caught my attention. One of the names mentioned sounded familiar. It was Arman's name. My heart immediately reacted, but I stayed silent and listened carefully. They were talking about a man who had recently joined a fast-growing property investment group, someone who was making quick deals and building strong connections in a short time. According to their conversation, this person had come from another city and was already gaining trust in business circles. I could not ignore what I heard. That night, I couldn't sleep at all. My mind kept replaying their words again and again. If it was truly Arman, then everything I believed about his disappearance changed completely. It meant he didn't just leave. He had started a new life somewhere else. But what hurt more was the thought that he had moved forward while I was left behind in complete ruin. The next morning, I decided to follow the lead. I had no clear plan, only determination. I started asking small questions in different places where real estate deals were discussed. I pretended to be someone curious about investment opportunities, just to gather information without revealing my identity. Slowly, I began connecting small pieces of information: a name, a company, a location. Everything started pointing toward one direction. Arman had indeed moved to another city and was now working under a slightly changed identity. As I collected more details, I learned that he was not just working normally. He was actively involved in property deals that required legal documentation and financial verification. This was the moment I started noticing something deeper. The properties he was dealing with included records that seemed familiar. Some of the documents had traces linked to old ownership details, possibly even mine. At first, I thought it might be a coincidence, but the more I checked, the clearer it became that he had used my identity in certain transactions. This discovery shocked me, but it also gave me clarity. It meant that my suffering was not just a result of abandonment, it was connected to a larger plan that I had not understood before. Arman was not just living a new life. He was building it using things that were once part of our shared past. The realization created a strange feeling inside me. It was a mix of anger, disbelief, and a growing need to uncover everything completely. I decided to move closer to the city where he was staying. It was not easy, but I managed small jobs along the way to earn just enough for travel and basic survival. Every step brought me closer to the truth I was searching for. When I finally reached the city, I did not approach him directly. Instead, I observed from a distance. I watched his office building, his meetings, and the people he interacted with. From the outside, he looked successful, confident, and respected. No one could imagine that behind that image was a man who had left his own sister with nothing. What surprised me most was how carefully he had built his new identity. He spoke differently, behaved differently, and had surrounded himself with people who trusted him completely. It was as if the past he came from no longer existed. But for me, that past was everything. It was my home, my family, and my life. As I continued observing him, I began understanding his habits, his schedule, and the people he depended on. I noticed which meetings were most important to him and which partners he trusted the most. I stayed invisible, never letting him know I was there. At the same time, I started thinking strategically instead of emotionally. I realized that confronting him directly would not give me answers or justice. I needed something stronger, something that would make the truth impossible to hide. During this time, I also confirmed something important. The properties he was handling were linked to legal inconsistencies. There were gaps in documentation, signatures that did not match perfectly, and records that suggested manipulation. I started collecting these details carefully, one by one, without drawing attention. Every piece of information I gathered made the situation clearer. This was not just betrayal on a personal level, it was part of a larger pattern of deception that could eventually collapse if exposed properly. I no longer felt like the helpless girl sitting at a bus station. I had started becoming someone who understood how to rebuild power, even from nothing. My emotions were still there, but they no longer controlled my actions. Instead, they fueled my patience and focus. I knew that whatever I was going to do next had to be precise, quiet, and calculated, because Arman had already shown that he knew how to disappear when needed. And I had to make sure this time there would be no escape for him. By the time I fully understood Arman's new life, something inside me had completely shifted. I was no longer the confused girl who lost everything overnight. I had become someone who watched, learned, and waited. Every detail I collected about him started forming a clear pattern in my mind. His business network was strong but not unbreakable. His confidence was high, but it depended heavily on trust. And trust, I realized, was the most fragile part of his world. That became my focus. I started moving more carefully in the city. I avoided attention, changed my appearance slightly, and made sure I was never in the same place for too long. I took small jobs wherever I could, just enough to survive and continue observing. At the same time, I began studying how his company operated. I learned about his investors, his partners, and the deals he was involved in. I noticed that he was not the kind of person who worked alone anymore. He had built a circle of people who believed in his vision and followed his decisions without questioning too deeply. That was his strength, but also his weakness. One of his business partners became my first point of entry. I did not approach directly or reveal who I was. Instead, I created small, harmless doubts. I started by sharing subtle inconsistencies I had noticed in property records connected to one of their ongoing deals. I did not accuse anyone. I simply asked questions that made people think. I made it look like I was an outsider who had accidentally come across information. Slowly, the curiosity I planted began spreading. At first, nothing major happened. But in business environments, doubt grows quietly. A delay here, a question there, a request for document verification. Soon, Arman's deal started facing unexpected pauses. His partners began asking for clarifications that he was not fully prepared for. I stayed completely in the background, watching how small cracks began forming in the structure he had built so carefully. I realized I could not rush anything. If I pushed too fast, I would expose myself and lose control of the situation. So I continued with patience. I fed information in small portions, always careful not to reveal the full picture at once. Each piece I shared was designed to raise questions without providing complete answers. This made people look deeper on their own, which was more powerful than direct accusation. While this was happening, I also kept searching for stronger proof. I knew that doubt alone would not bring him down. I needed solid evidence that could not be ignored or explained away. I spent long nights reviewing documents I had managed to access indirectly through various connections. I compared signatures, transaction records, and property ownership details. The more I studied, the more I confirmed what I already suspected. There were serious inconsistencies that pointed clearly toward manipulation and misuse of identity information. What shocked me most was how confident Arman had become in covering his tracks. He had not acted carelessly. Everything was designed to appear legitimate on the surface. But no system built on deception is perfect. Small mistakes always remain, and I was determined to find every one of them. As pressure slowly increased around him, I noticed a change in his behavior. He became more alert, more defensive. Meetings became longer, discussions more tense. He started reviewing documents multiple times and questioning even his closest associates. This was exactly what I wanted. I was not attacking him directly, but I was making his world unstable enough that he would start revealing his own weaknesses. Then came the most important discovery. While investigating deeper financial links, I managed to access information that connected him directly to fraudulent property transfers, including those that involved my identity. It was not just one isolated case. There were multiple transactions spread over time. Each one added another layer of proof that his success had been built on manipulation and illegal use of trust. This was the moment I knew I had reached a turning point. I now had enough material to expose him, but I still chose not to act immediately. I wanted the impact to be complete. I wanted everything he built to collapse in a way that he could not control or reverse. So I decided to take the final step carefully. Instead of going to authorities first, I approached the people who had the most to lose if the truth came out: his investors. I compiled the strongest evidence I had, including documents, transaction details, and identity links. I ensured everything was clear and organized so there would be no confusion or escape routes. Then I sent it anonymously to select investors who were deeply involved in his company. I did not reveal myself. I only allowed the truth to speak for itself. The reaction was immediate but silent at first. Investors began verifying the information. Meetings were called. Internal discussions started happening behind closed doors. I could feel the shift happening even without seeing it directly. Confidence turned into doubt. Trust turned into suspicion. And suspicion slowly turned into fear. Within days, the structure around Arman started breaking apart. Deals were paused. Funds were frozen. Legal teams were contacted. What once looked like a rising success story began turning into an investigation zone. I continued watching everything from a distance, making sure no link led back to me. At the same time, I prepared for the possibility that Arman would try to escape again. I knew him well enough to understand that when cornered, he would either fight back or disappear. So I stayed alert, tracking his movements quietly while ensuring I remained invisible in every part of the process. The plan was no longer just about exposure. It had become a complete dismantling of his carefully built world. Every step I took was measured, every action calculated, because I knew that the final moment would decide everything that came after this phase of my life. Everything started collapsing faster than I had expected. The information I had sent did not stay hidden for long. Once investors began verifying the documents, the truth spread through Arman's entire business network like a slow but unstoppable fire. At first, he tried to control the situation. He called emergency meetings, reassured his partners, and claimed it was a misunderstanding or a deliberate attempt to damage his reputation. But the more he spoke, the more people began questioning him. Trust, once shaken, never returns in the same form. I stayed in the background, watching every development carefully. I did not need to interfere anymore. The system itself was now working against him. Investors who once praised him began demanding explanations. Legal teams started reviewing every deal he had made in the past. The same people who supported him were now distancing themselves to protect their own interests. I could see his world slowly turning into a place where he no longer had control. Arman was not used to losing power. For him, control had always been the foundation of everything. So when things started slipping, he reacted emotionally. He became aggressive in meetings, defensive in conversations, and paranoid about everyone around him. He started doubting his own team, thinking someone inside his circle had betrayed him, but he had no idea that the real source of everything was much closer than he could imagine. As the pressure increased, financial transactions began freezing. Some of his major deals were put on hold. Others were completely cancelled. News about irregularities started spreading quietly in business circles. It was not public yet, but within his world, everyone already knew something was wrong. His carefully built image of success started cracking in places he could no longer hide. Then came the investigation notice. Authorities had begun reviewing certain property transactions linked to his company. The documents I had shared indirectly played a role in triggering deeper scrutiny. Once official processes began, everything moved in a direction that could not be controlled anymore. Arman tried to find legal support, but even lawyers were now cautious about representing him. His reputation had become too unstable. During all this, I kept my distance. I did not want to interfere directly or reveal myself too early. I wanted to see how far his downfall would go on its own. But there was a part of me that still felt a strange emptiness. I had spent so long focusing on exposing him that I never fully thought about what would happen when it actually began happening. The reality of watching him lose everything was not as satisfying as I once imagined. One evening, I decided to move closer to his location again. I did not enter his office directly. Instead, I stayed nearby and observed. I wanted to see him, not as a businessman under pressure, but as the brother I once trusted. When I finally saw him, he looked different. The confidence he once carried was gone. His face showed exhaustion and his movements were slower. He was no longer the man who controlled everything. He was someone trying to hold together a collapsing life. That moment created a conflict inside me. The anger I had carried for so long was still there, but it was no longer as sharp. I remembered the days when I believed in him completely, when I thought he would always protect me. Seeing him like this made everything feel more complicated than I had expected. But there was no turning back now. The final breakdown happened quickly. One of his major investors officially withdrew, followed by others. Once that happened, the remaining trusts disappeared almost instantly. The company structure he built began falling apart piece by piece. Employees started leaving. Contracts were terminated. Bank accounts were frozen for verification. Within a short time, everything he had worked for started dissolving in front of him. Arman tried to leave the city quietly, but it was already too late. His name was under review, and his movements were being watched. Authorities eventually reached him for questioning regarding financial irregularities and property fraud. It was not a dramatic arrest, but a controlled legal process that left no space for escape. For someone like him, who always believed he could manage every situation, this was the ultimate loss of control. I found out about it later, not through direct contact, but through information spreading across business circles. The news confirmed that his assets were being investigated and his deals were under legal examination. Everything he built using manipulation and trust was now being dismantled step by step by the same system he once used to rise. I finally decided to meet him after everything had settled into silence. I did not go as a sister seeking revenge or forgiveness. I went as someone who needed closure. When I saw him again, he was sitting alone in a small office space that once belonged to his company. It was almost empty. The energy of power that once surrounded him was gone completely. He looked at me when I entered, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. There was too much history between us, too many broken layers of trust and silence. His expression showed shock first, then realization. He understood without me needing to explain anything. "You," he said quietly, as if trying to confirm what he already knew. I stood there for a moment, looking at him not as a powerful businessman, not even as the version of my brother I once admired, but as someone who had reached the end of everything he built. For a long time, neither of us said anything else. The silence between us was heavier than any words could have been. He seemed to want to defend himself, to explain, to justify everything, but no explanation could rebuild what had already fallen apart. Finally, he lowered his gaze. The confidence, the control, and the pride were completely gone. What remained was only the reality of everything that had happened, sitting between us like something neither of us could ignore anymore. And that's how everything came to an end. Sometimes life doesn't give us the closure we expect. It only gives us the truth we were avoiding for too long. Betrayal changes people, and revenge doesn't always bring peace the way we imagine it will. If this story touched you, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more emotional and powerful stories like this. Now tell me in the comments, what would you have done if you were in Maya's place?